ladies and gentlemen. I am Dorian Barrow, the Dean of the Faculty of Education at Galen University. And I'm very pleased to be the host of this first series of podcasts from Galen University. This series is going to be focusing on education and some of the challenges of our education system and some of the solutions and the way how Galen is trying to make its contribution towards those solutions. We start the series with a discussion on a topic that is near and dear to a lot of people's heart, but especially so to the three guests that we have to address the main issue associated with trauma and the fact that our schools need to become a lot more responsive to the students who come to the school with trauma, and that our teachers need to be better equipped in terms of facilitating these students in achieving their goals. So even though they're traumatized, they too have to succeed. And our guests, I'd like to introduce our guests that we have for you this morning to really elaborate on this. I will ask each of them to tell us a little bit about themselves and what they do, especially as it relates to this area of service. So we'll start with Mr. Stephen Milete Nembhard.
Good evening, everyone. So, first of all, thank you for having me here, Dr. Barrow. You know, it's truly a pleasure. As you stated, this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. So, once again, my name is Stephen Nembhard. Currently, I'm a school social worker at a high school called Pulse in the Bronx. And actually, the neighborhood that my school is in right now is almost, I would say, like kind of the equivalent to Southside and Belize in the Bronx. So it's kind of like the epicenter right now of youth violence, you know, a lot of gang violence. And my school is what we call a transfer high school, which is basically like a second chance or a last chance high school for youth who, you know, may have dropped out, may have been kicked out, you know, may have had some type of difficulties academically that had them fall behind. And so I've been working with a similar population for most of my career. Before this, I was a program director of another transfer school in Brooklyn. Before that, I was a program director of a community center, which was inside one of the NYCHA developments in Brooklyn, which is NYCHA public housing in New York City. And then before that, I was a counselor in a transfer high school in Brooklyn to, you know, another alternative high school. Then myself, I'm actually a graduate of an alternative high school in Brooklyn as well. So I would say basically, you know, this is kind of my calling is to work with at-risk youth. And basically, you know, that's why I'm here.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. Ms. Debora Domingo, Mrs. Debora Domingo, could you introduce yourself?
Of course. I am Debbie Domingo, currently the principal at Maud Williams High School. Maud Williams High was established in the year 2000, and I'm a recent principal there. But I've been in the education sector for 34 years. In a few months, I'll be marking my 35th anniversary as an educator. Most of my experience has been at the secondary level, but I have had some experience at the tertiary as the Dean of St. John's Junior College School of Professional Studies, and as the general manager of Anglican schools. And just previous to this new stint as a principal, I was the chief education officer for the Ministry of Education in Belize. And so I am delighted to be a part of today's panel. Thanks, Dr. Barrow and Galen University for this opportunity to be a part of today's discussion. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I am so excited to know that Galen is starting the podcast with a focus on trauma and the impact on education, perhaps even on mental health and healthcare.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Domingo. And last, but of course, we always left the best for last, is Dr. Raven Barrow. Can you introduce yourself, Dr. Barrow?
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to meet all of you. And glad to hear that you're passionate about some of the same things that I'm passionate about. A little bit about me. I've been working in community mental health for probably 10 years. I work at the forefront of criminal justice reform. I worked with the U.S. courts, primarily working with the incarcerated adult and youth population, and working on helping clients reintegrate back into the community successfully. In addition to that, I also, a lot of my community mental health work is with children and adolescents, teaching and teaching students and teachers about trauma-informed classroom settings, how to be a culturally responsive teacher. I work with a lot of at-risk youth, providing mental health care. In addition to that, I'm assistant adjunct faculty at USC, where I'm teaching about theory, teaching clinicians how to be culturally responsive, how to implement trauma-informed care, what that looks like, and really contextualizing it and defining it for them. I'm really passionate about how trauma impacts communities in a way that we're not even aware of the real impact. And we see that impact often in our classroom settings. We see it in obviously our incarcerated population. And so it does real harm. So it's really important for us to have these conversations so that, number one, we can be more informed about what trauma is, what it looks like, how it shows up, and how we can be impactful in reducing the harm of trauma.
Well, thank you very, 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 very much, Raven. So let's get to the crux of this matter, as Archibonko would say. I want to ask this question, and I would like Stephen to really start us off with this in terms of what is a trauma-sensitive school and what paradigm shifts are required to become a trauma-sensitive educator. What is a trauma-sensitive school? Which are the type of schools that we want to create in the country? And what kind of paradigm shift is required to become somebody like you who is a trauma-sensitive educator?
Okay. So when I think about being trauma sensitive, first I think of being trauma informed, which I kind of feel like is the first step, and then moving to being trauma responsive. So trauma informed, kind of as it says, is being aware of, what trauma is, the effects of trauma on young people or anyone for that matter's ability to regulate their emotions, their behavior, different types of trauma, such as acute trauma, chronic trauma, complex trauma, which acute trauma would be like, let's say, individual situation. Like, let's say someone, got in a car crash and almost, lost their life. But that one situation. Chronic trauma would be multiple situations, such as maybe living in a dangerous neighborhood where, you've witnessed a number of shootings or, even been a victim of, numerous incidents. And then complex trauma, which is more so where, let's say you grew up in a household where, where incest is involved, or maybe your one of your parents or primary caregivers is a substance abuser. So, it becomes much more complex because, let's say, the same person who may be, hurting me or abusing me is also someone who's responsible for caring for me. So I may have mixed feelings of, loving this person, but, still being abused by this person. So I would say the real paradigm shift that we have to start with is going from, instead of kind of like the old school classical way of, when young people, when students come into these school institutions, with these issues, many times they're labeled as just difficult students or students that don't want to learn or students that have bad attitudes. And so instead of looking at these students and saying what's wrong with you, we need to look at these students and say what happens and try to understand, the root and cause of, these behaviors. And I think in order to move towards that, it's really important to establish, safety. And when I say safety, I don't just mean, physical safety, but I mean emotional safety in terms of a school institution. Also, just trustworthiness, transparency, consistency in structure, and then empowerment, voice, and choice, I would say. And as we'll probably get more into later, I think a big way to implement that is through social emotional learning, which, really kind of helps students learn self-awareness, learn self-control, learn social awareness, and then interpersonal skills.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for that heightened introduction. Debbie, you are on the ground here at Mad Williams. How real is this in your school? I know not every child that comes to our school are victims of trauma, but the sense that I get, and from my own experience as an educator, is that a significant number of our students and an increasing number are coming to school suffering from this kind of ailment. What has been your experience, especially at your latest job on the Southside High School, Mad Williams?
Dr. Barrow, I believe that trauma is more widespread than you're letting on. We all experience trauma to different degrees and to different extent. At Mad Williams, we have had to come to terms with who we are serving in the institution. And what we have found is that most of our students come from Southside Belize City, where the poverty rate is high and just struggling for to get a meal to eat, for stable shelter. Those things in and of themselves are traumatic. That is beside the exposure to violence they are experiencing in their own communities every day. And I think Stephen explained it excellently. So what we found that was that in our school, we have the students who are exposed to the acute trauma and the chronic trauma, and they also have the very complex, because some of our students are at risk for extreme violence. We lost one of our students. He was murdered late last year. Just moving through certain neighborhoods to get to school is traumatic for a number of our students because they fear a beatdown on the way to school. And so the level of anxiety increases in the morning because you have to pass through certain neighborhoods and they may be okay at school. But toward the end of the day, there may be behavior changes only for us to find out that there is a heightened state of anxiety because they now must depart from school and risk being physically harmed. And so that is what we have at Maud Williams. But I'm also very mindful as well that even the teachers, in providing the kind of positive environment that listening ear begin to experience secondary exposure to trauma. And that is, I think, in addition to the trauma they bring to the table as professionals. And so it is important for a school where we serve clients who may be under the different spectrum of trauma, for the teachers to be well-grounded themselves because they bring their own trauma. Their trauma helps to inform their approach to teaching. And in a school like Maud Williams, where relationship is so important, we must be able to provide opportunities for the teachers to take care of themselves so that they can connect with the students. So it informs a whole lot of things. It informs the approach to recruiting the teachers who can be effective in a school environment like Maud Williams High School. Teachers who will bring the kind of disposition and the openness to learn more about trauma and to have it inform their practices, their pedagogical approaches, and certainly for the school leader. As if the school leader is not informed and sensitized, then there is no revisiting of school policies. There's no revisiting of your practices. You don't have the safeguards and the other things in place to ensure that your school climate, your school environment is the kind of place that helps students to be safe and to build positive relationships so that they can learn.
Thank you very much, Debbie. So the problem is very much real, and Maud Williams is just one example of many high schools in the country. We have about 60 high schools in all of Belize, and there are many Maud Williams, many Maud Williams, where this experience is just being repeated. Dr. Barrow, I know you're a researcher, and you also work with the criminal justice system. I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about what are some of the tiered interventions for helping students to feel safer in schools, to feel more connected in schools, to be more self-confident, to be more self-directed. And what are some of the things that teachers should know, that teachers can learn, some of the skills that teachers can develop in order to help them to better, first of all, serve the students, but also to keep their own mental health? Dr. Barrow?
Well, that was a lot. But let me just start with, I think we've covered some really important topics, because I think we can't be sort of responsive unless we really fully know what we're dealing with, right? And so when we talk about trauma, as I thought Stephen defined it beautifully, you know, we're navigating different types of trauma and how a person experiences the trauma, particularly when you're navigating complex trauma. It means that a person is exposed to so much trauma, they're not even having the awareness of how impactful it is on their mental health, their physiological health, their emotional health, and their social health. And so that shows up in all settings, right? That shows up in the classroom, most importantly. That shows up in the community. That shows up everywhere, right? The impact of it. So how we deal with it and how we navigate it from a research perspective, what we've been trying to do is really sort of conceptualize and understand the paradigm of trauma and understand how do we screen for it and how do we measure it and then how do we respond to it. So I'm based in Los Angeles, and in California, we have a Surgeon General. Her name is Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who's done a lot of research around adverse childhood experiences. And it is sort of another word for traumatic stress. And basically what we learned from that research is the more ACEs one has, the more impactful it is on your physical health. So we know that there's a direct correlation between trauma and your physical health. That means medical health problems. We know that there's a correlation between trauma and mental health. So you're going to see kiddos, as Ms. Domingo talked about earlier, heightened state of anxiety. You're going to see that as a direct impact correlation. So in the class, you're going to see kids who are impulsive, who can't sit down, who don't want to sit down, who are defiant, who don't listen, or who are withdrawn. So you're going to see a direct correlation between trauma and mental health, social health, how they interact with their peers, how they interact with their teachers, their ability and willingness to open up and talk about it. So it's really important, I think, for there to be continued education on trauma, because people are walking around with it and don't even know that they're impacted by trauma. And it's because it becomes so entrenched in the culture and the community that we think this is normal, right? Like this is a normal way of being, and it's not a healthy way of being. So, in addition to adverse childhood experiences, what they've learned from that is that if you have 4 or more ACEs, then it's significant. That means there is real impact that's going to happen. There's research that demonstrates that the more you have, the more risks that you will be for going to jail. So for me, from working with incarceration, I see that many of the people that I work with have scores of 8 or 9 ACEs. And so to define what ACEs are, it's household, what they consider household dysfunction. So abuse in the home, exposure to abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. There is neglect in the home. So even, families who aren't intentional, but as we talked about, poverty is a real thing. It's an impact. Not having enough food on the table, not having resources, that's trauma. So in addition to the ACEs study, the Philadelphia ACE took another look at trauma, and they added on environmental stressors. So they've looked at community violence and the impact of community. So we're talking about all these things, right? The more ACEs you have, the more risks you have, the more likely you are to have all of these, related issues. So how do we navigate? Well, from an ACE perspective is what we call resilience. So how do you create a buffer to some of these traumatic experiences, right? Because we have to be empowered. There has to be something we can actually do about it, right? So how do we create resilience in our youth, in our community, in the classroom, so that they can navigate the stressors of their day-to-day life? And so I think the schools is a beautiful environment where that can actually happen. And so that's where the school, the classroom setting can be a safe space to sort of apply these interventions to make the space feel safe. And then those interventions can be utilized at home. And so there's many approaches that what can actually be done in the classroom to sort of help alleviate some of that distress. Did you want me to just dive into those things, or do we want to talk about that collectively?
Well, we can talk about that collectively. Thanks for shedding that in-depth light on this issue. Steve, tell me something. The rate of success of using these interventions, how have you experienced that in your setting in New York?
I'm not sure I could answer the rate of success. I guess numerically. However, I guess anecdotally, based on my experience, some of the things we've implemented that I started doing a couple of years ago, actually, at my previous school, and then I also carried over to where I'm currently at, is as I said, kind of before, social emotional learning. And one of the big tools that we use for that is what's called restorative justice. And in terms of that, one of the main aspects of that we do is something called restorative circles. So what we do is we basically have daily restorative circles where we teach the young people, first of all, to check in basically on like a scale from 1 to 5. We call it Fist of 5. And they'll name, basically how they're doing that day. So like a 1 would be like they're having a horrible day, they're feeling horrible. A 5 would be, they're having an amazing day, they're feeling an amazing. And one of the reasons why we have them do that at first is for two things. Is one, it builds their self-awareness to know, and name, how they're feeling. It also builds our awareness of, how to deal with them or how to approach them based on, what they're going through. And so I think we've seen a whole lot of success with that. And kind of anecdotally, we've had young people tell us, this is the most that I've talked in, my whole high school experience, just in a matter of months, just from having the opportunity to do these check-ins. Also during these circles, we'll have discussions about kind of, real life events, real life circumstances, giving them, the opportunity to express themselves, their emotions, their opinions. Sometimes we even do fun things like we'll break down like lyrics to songs with them and then kind of have them talk about, how it relates to their life or, doesn't relate to their life. But when we do that, also, we include the teachers. And so the teachers are also checking in. The teachers are also hearing the check-ins. And so that's also making the students see the teachers on a different level. So instead of just seeing, the teachers as kind of these, these receptacles of, of knowledge or, someone who's just coming in to teach you, they also see the students. They also see the teachers, as, people who, have their own lives and their own past and their own issues. And that's relatable. And it kind of, builds a bridge, and vice versa. The teachers also, see the students in a different light, not just, like an empty receptacle who I need to, I guess, give this knowledge to, as was kind of, I think, the classical way of teaching. And so I think we've seen a lot of movement in terms of school culture. With that, we've seen, students being much more open. I think also teachers, I think that helps with, part of the paradigm shift. And then something that we also do is that we'll do those same restorative circles just with the school staff as well. So that now, the school staff, has an opportunity to, say how their week went, kind of, talk about issues that they're going through and whatnot.
Okay, I get that. Thanks, Steve. Debora, what are some of the challenges you have found for teacher buy-in to this, right? I guess a lot of teachers, when they started, didn't have this on their mind. And this is the reality. How difficult have you find them buying into this new approach and the need for these new set of skills?
Okay, so Dr. Barrow, some habits are just hard to die. And a lot of our teachers are accustomed to using punishment in a as one of the part of correcting behavior. And so I know one of the things that teachers initially struggled with was the removal of the demerit system and so on. And when we introduce our restorative practices, that took some effort, and it still is very important for us to provide the continuous professional development opportunities as we go along. Or else people would just revert to what they're accustomed to doing. So that is one. The reminders are absolutely important. And at Maud Williams, we have embraced mindfulness. And so when the students come to school in the morning, they do the check-in, and we go through our daily affirmations and their breaths. And you would be amazed at the impact that has on our students, just kind of leaving a lot of the things they have brought with them, leaving that at the gate and putting themselves in the right frame of mind. And so we found that to be very, very helpful. And in an effort to further encourage teachers to use the restorative practices, it has been incorporated into our observation and appraisal system. And that, I think, has really helped. But it requires vigilance to ensure that we continue with the buy-in until it is a part of what we do normally.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Domingo. Finally, Dr. Barrow, the research side of this matter, because we in Belize have to continue to strengthen our research culture. We have to begin to put a lot more focus on knowledge generation within a Belizean context. What are some of the challenges we're up against in terms of, first of all, doing research in this particular area, right? And actually carrying out those kinds of research?
That's a tough question, because I would probably need to have a better grasp on the resources available, right? To be able to sort of do this research. But what I can say is a lot of the research could actually happen in the classroom setting, right? So a lot of it is gathering or the research that's happening at your university, right? So like a lot of it is gathering information. So like numbers, right? Like to show impact. Like these are the numbers of students. Like let's just say every student at your school, Ms. Domingo, did the A survey. You have a real pool, right, of data, of research, of not only how many students are impacted, but to the degree and what that means for your students. And so I think that gives a lot of sort of information to help demonstrate the need for more of this research, the impact, so that you can all be responsive. What I do want to add to the conversation about sort of the paradigm shift, particularly for teachers, we have to begin to change the way that we look at things, and we have to say like we have to go from saying what is wrong with that kid to what happened. And I think a part of it is because, my parents are Belizean, so I understand like how you're raised, how you were taught to shape behavior, to change behavior, that impacts how you interact with others. And so we have to change sort of how the ways in which we were shaped or conditioned or taught, and sort of relearn. And as we know, with learning, that takes time too. And I think a part of it is continued education, and even meetings like this with your teachers to sort of check in with them and give them a space. And I can't not have this conversation with integrating the importance of mental health within the school setting. And so I don't know about accessibility to therapists in the class, you know, in the school setting, who can sort of navigate some of these issues from a mental health perspective, and also gives a space for students to just talk about these things outside of the classroom setting. And then it doesn't take up more time in the classroom for teachers to kind of have to navigate that. So just wanted to add that to the discussion. But from a research perspective, it always starts with data information, so that it creates sort of the need for more research to happen.
Well, thank you very much, panel. It is almost as if though I am a spoil sport and we have to stop a very good conversation. I'd like to thank you for spending time with us, sharing your experiences, sharing your expertise, and planting the seed of the need for this paradigm shift in Belize. We at Galen are doing our part. I mean, not only through an initiative like that, but an initiative like this one, this podcast series, but also through our programs. And some of our other podcasts will be focusing on some of the specific ways in which we do that. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Nembhard. I'd like to thank you, Miss Debbie, Mrs. Domingo, and I would like to especially thank you, Dr. Raven Barrow, for participating and for enlightening the Belizean public on this very, very important issue. Thank you very much, and good day.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.